Keir Starmer having an affair with his voice coach. I know, dog. I know. Disbelief. I mean, I think we all have some questions, don't we? Question 1. Why do guys always have affairs with people that look exactly like the wife they already had? I mean, if you've already got that wife, what's the point of having an affair with another woman who looks exactly the same as the wife that you apparently don't want? Why not pick someone, you know, super exciting, maybe with massive boobs, or a lady from another continent with an enormous bottom? I mean, just something completely different to what you've already got. Why are you still shopping in the same supermarket, so to speak? If you've already got Sainsbury's, why are you going back there? Second up, if you're a voice coach and you're going to have an affair, why would you choose Keir Starmer? Why would you make that your hill to die on? That's your entire professional reputation.
Katie Hopkins just did what no mainstream journalist dared to do. She completely caught Keir Starmer off guard by confronting him on live TV. And what followed was absolute carnage. No filters, no mercy, just raw, blistering truth aimed straight at the heart of Starmer's fragile political persona. Within minutes, Hopkins ripped through the polished mask, exposing the chaos, cowardice and hypocrisy that lurked beneath the surface. She didn't stutter, she didn't flinch, and she sure as hell didn't let Starmer off the hook.
Don't treat this as just a spat. This is very important because there's a cultural war that's been going on in the Tory party on institutions. And it started with the EU, it went into courts, into the BBC, and now this is a cultural attack on the way government is done, and stripping away the checks and balances and attacking the civil service. This is much more significant than just the usual row that you might have within government about, you know, special advisors, etc. See this for what it is. It's actually a damaging and continuing cultural war.
I mean, I agree that it's significant, and I mean, the interesting thing, and we can talk about this next time, I hope, the interesting thing about it is, obviously, it gets people like you and, you know, many people in my world exercised, but out there, British people...
The so-called leader of the Labour Party was left floundering, fumbling and humiliated in front of a stunned audience. This wasn't just a rant, it was a political execution, and Starmer, he may never recover. It all started with what looked like a regular political segment, the type filled with stiff smiles, scripted questions and the usual empty promises from another tired politician. Keir Starmer was there playing the role he knows best, the polished pretender. Calm voice, calculated words and talking points were rehearsed to perfection. He thought it would be another soft ride, another chance to feed the public the same lifeless lines he's been pushing for years. But then the air changed. Katie Hopkins entered the conversation.
Here's the thing, Keir. I've had a thought that fixes a lot of your problems. So, you're looking to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, specifically Kyiv. I thought, why don't you get all the people that had a Ukraine flag on their social media profile? Obviously, they had to take down their NHS one and their LGBTQ one to put up the Ukraine one. But those people, and the people who took in a Ukrainian into their homes like a little pet, you know, just for Christmas. The people that are like, oh yeah, we've got one. Yeah, we've got a Ukrainian family. Yeah. We've got a Ukrainian family. Yeah, because we're a better kind of person. Yeah, it's just who we are. Maybe they should be the ones that put boots on the ground over in Ukraine, because they obviously care so deeply about the whole situation. And then you could just leave the rest of us mardy bastards alone.
It was a total shock, as no one expected what was about to come. Not the producers, not the panel, and certainly not Keir Starmer, because while he was busy reciting his vision for Britain, Katie sat still, watching him with the kind of expression that said, "I've heard enough."
Great news today for illegal asylum seekers here in the UK, where 15,000 of you will no longer have to sit through a really pesky, boring, dull interview in order to be able to access all of the benefits of the UK. All you have to do is fill in a little tinsy-wincy form, and I'm sure before too long there's going to be offices springing up conveniently located to the hotels that you've been placed in that will fill in that form for you, probably at taxpayers' expense, with all the right answers. And thank God, because if you come from Afghanistan or Eritrea or Somalia, you don't need to be bothering with things like language or form filling. You just want to get in and access all the things the UK has provided for you. And in fact, on that point, there is now 12 million government contract out for the provision of health and dental care services to illegals and asylum seekers here. And whilst ordinary British taxpayers like me had to wait 18 months recently just to try and get my driving licence refused, and I have to have a virtual interview at a GP's via a receptionist to try and get an appointment for my sick kid, you guys don't have to deal with any of that. And it's also a brilliant selling point, isn't it? For people who are trying their best to bring other illegals over on inflatable dinghies. Now they can say, look guys, come over because you don't even have to sit through a pesky interview. So all round great news and a great time to be an illegal here in the UK today.
And then, like a dagger slicing through dead air, she interrupted. Calm, controlled, lethal. "Kay," she said, "do you even believe the words coming out of your own mouth?" You could hear a pin drop in the studio. The silence was deafening. And Starmer, he blinked, caught completely off guard. It was the kind of moment that separates real challengers from political mannequins. Hopkins wasn't there to play nice. She wasn't there to nod politely. She was there to hold him accountable, and she wasn't going to let him wiggle free. She began with the basics. "You talk about rebuilding Britain, about hope, about the future," she said. "But what future are you offering? One full of rising taxes, empty slogans, and betrayal of the very people who voted for you." Starmer shifted in his seat. The polished politician was already starting to crack. Then came the bombs, the brutal truth bombs, as Hopkins laid bare Starmer's record piece by piece. "You say you're for the working class, yet you raise their council tax. You say you're for truth, yet you lie through your teeth." The Prime Minister tried to respond by mumbling something about economic pressure. But Hopkins cut through it like a buzzsaw. "Don't insult our intelligence. You broke your promises before your first day as Prime Minister. You said you'd stick to the pledges that got you elected. But now you're slashing and burning everything people rely on just to keep your billionaire donors happy." The room felt colder. The mask was slipping, and the audience could see it. Hopkins leaned forward and hit him where it hurt. "Tell me, Keir, what do you actually believe in? Because from where I'm standing, you're just another puppet dancing for the globalists, bending for the bankers and smiling for the cameras. While the country falls apart." Starmer fumbled again by trying to mention international diplomacy, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted, and the crowd could sense that this wasn't just an argument. This was a public execution of Starmer's public image happening before their own eyes. Hopkins turned her attention to his hypocrisy, specifically his public stances versus his private actions. The blood drained from Starmer's face, but Hopkins wasn't done yet. The air was thick with tension. The audience wasn't just watching a debate, they were watching a man being stripped of every illusion he'd built, as every lie, every compromise and every betrayal was laid bare, one after another, by Hopkins. Then she ended that first wave of fury with a line that will echo in British politics for a long time. "You're not the solution, Keir, you're the problem in a nicer suit." And with that, the first blow had landed. The storm had just begun. The silence after Hopkins's final line wasn't just awkward, it was devastating. Keir Starmer sat still, but you could see the tremor behind his eyes. His mouth was slightly open, like he was about to speak, but the words wouldn't come. This wasn't the script he had rehearsed. This wasn't the soft media treatment he usually received. And for the first time in a long time, the carefully constructed image of Sir Keir Starmer, the composed, calculated and confident leader, began to fall apart right in front of the nation. But Hopkins wasn't finished. In addition, she wasn't looking for an apology or an explanation. She came with ammunition, and she had plenty more to unload. The fearless host pivoted to the heart of what's been boiling across Britain. For months now, the betrayal of the working class. "You've turned your back on the very people who carried this country through the crisis," she said, her voice sharper. The accusation wasn't just political, it was deeply personal, because for millions across the country, the pain was real. The betrayal was raw, and now finally someone was saying it out loud. Starmer's face tightened as he reached for the usual lifeline policy jargon. He began speaking about fiscal responsibility and long-term economic planning, but it only made it worse for him. Hopkins laughed, shaking her head with cold disgust before dropping more bombs. "You talk about responsibility while pensioners freeze in their homes. You talk about planning while our schools crumble. You stand there and pretend you're building a future when all you've built is a house of cards. The audience was glued to the confrontation. This wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about truth versus lies, reality versus illusion. And for Starmer, he was crumbling under pressure, practically unravelling. However, Hopkins moved in for another blow. Where were you when the cost of living crisis exploded? Where were you when small towns lost their high streets, when energy bills tripled, when mothers had to skip meals so their kids could eat? You were nowhere. You were silent, hiding behind empty press releases, taking advice from PR teams, too scared to say anything real because it might cost you votes. That hit hard because Starmer had sold himself as a serious man for serious times, but Hopkins was ripping that image to shreds. To her, he was a hollow man, one who wore integrity like a costume, only to shed it the moment things got uncomfortable. Then she shifted gears again, this time to Starmer's flip-flopping on national values. You bow to foreign pressure, you attack your own culture. You can't even define what it means to be British anymore. You kneel for foreign causes, but you stand for nothing here. Your silence on grooming gangs, your weakness on illegal immigration, your cowardice in confronting radical ideologies is not just pathetic, it's dangerous, Hopkins concluded. The camera caught Starmer's hand trembling slightly as he reached for a glass of water. It wasn't just the heat of debate, it was exposure. Hopkins was peeling back the layers of political polish, and underneath what people saw was a man without conviction. It was brutal, and Starmer looked like he had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. Every line on his face deepened as he struggled to keep control of the narrative. But control was gone. Hopkins had stolen it, piece by piece, with every sentence that struck harder than the last. And for once, Starmer had no reply. The words didn't come. The talking points collapsed under the weight of reality, and all that was left was silence, and the unmistakable sound of a political empire starting to crumble. The air was thick with tension, and it was clear Starmer was already drowning in his contradictions, and Katie Hopkins had no intention of letting him come up for air. She circled back to the Labour manifesto, or what was left of it. She even called the promises a joke.
He said, we've turned the corner. Yeah. And where are we now? Britain in recession. An economy smaller than when the Prime Minister entered Downing Street. The textbook definition of decline, that is their record. I mean, after 14 years, who do they actually think feels better off? Productivity is flat. Mortgages through the roof. House building off a cliff. Worklessness rising and rising. Homelessness never higher. Crime virtually unpunished. Children who can't see a dentist. Sewage in our rivers. Billions and billions of taxpayers' money wasted. 7 billion by the Prime Minister on COVID fraud alone. 500 million on the Rwanda scheme that has achieved precisely nothing. I can keep going, a railway line that will never reach our great northern cities. In fact, it might not even reach central London. Billions upon billions for a white elephant.
And the audience wasn't just listening, they were feeling it. The disbelief, the frustration, and the betrayal. Frankly, everything Hopkins said wasn't just political, it was deeply personal for millions of people in Britain. As the show gradually headed towards the closing stages, Hopkins' statement suggested that people are waking up because they're tired of being lied to and tired of people like Starmer who promise everything, deliver nothing, and then disappear when the cameras stop rolling.
The sex you were born, by the way.
And it is common sense that the majority, the overwhelming majority of people in this country adhere to, but it's a vocal minority of people that are disrupting that for the rest of us. And I think people, as I say, they wake up in the morning, they just want to make sure that they've got a good school to send their kids to, that they've got that childcare in place.
They need an operation, they can get to the GP, get in.
Exactly.
That's it, we're not asking for much.
No.
We're not asking for much, but also, but like, if you're spending time, if you're going, oh, we have to appeal for money, please give money to this organisation, but meanwhile, we're doing a whole load of events, LGBT. I don't understand. Unless the National Trust isn't giving people jobs or promoting people because of their sexuality, I don't see what the LGBT thing has got anything to do with them. It's totally irrelevant.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, look, it comes towards the, when you head towards a general election, if you've got a Labour Party and you've got these institutions that are, worrying about all of these,
Overall, the takedown wasn't just brutal, it was surgical, as Hopkins had cut deep, exposing every inconsistency, every betrayal, every cowardly move Keir Starmer had made. And now the weight of those decisions, those broken promises, was going to crash down on him.
Breaking news here in batshit bonkers Britain, where the trans mafia are struggling to cope with the judgment that only biological women can be known as women. Companies are now looking at putting back proper toilet signs on the doors where you have men's and women's, which is all we ever really wanted in the first place. No woman wants to piss where a man has pissed. We don't care if you're a bloke that identifies as David or Doreen. We simply don't want piss on our seats. That's about the size of it. The judge says there was no celebration for anyone, but that's not what I saw with my sturdy little lesbians. My sturdy little lesbians were celebrating hard, and good on them. Well done, you sturdy little lesbians. In other news, the Board of Deputies, a so-called Jewish organisation, has come out with signatories that they had on store anyway, to say that they're basically now in support of Hamas. Those of us that know.
Looking at his face afterward, he looked older, smaller and weaker. The audience didn't cheer, but they didn't need to after what had happened. Honestly, the silence said it all. It was the kind of silence that comes not from awe, but from recognition. A clear indication that the man sitting under those lights with his polished shoes and expensive haircut had just been laid bare, and in that silence, the myth of Keir Starmer, a sensible, serious and electable man, collapsed under the truth Katie Hopkins had just unleashed. Whatever happens to Starmer after this shocking confrontation, it will be remembered that the collapse of his political career wasn't orchestrated by opponents. It was done by the organic, unstoppable Hopkins, who simply pulled the curtain back and showed the act. She exposed what remained and made everyone understand that Starmer was a man who had built his image on caution and compromise. As for Starmer, he simply has to watch as the polished image he spent decades building crumbled under an hour. If you enjoyed this political unravelling, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating political content.